What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Latino Free Minds. I'm Daniel. I'm here with I got a special guest host today. I have Peter Hernandez, candidate for Congress, District 18. This is his second time on the show. Peter, thank you for coming on. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Of course. Thanks, Danny. Anytime we have a chance to speak to the public about the complicated issues of government in a way that they can understand, I that's part of my passion is for the community, the Latino community, obviously also to understand just so many things happening, and a lot of this stuff is kind of under the radar, or at least they're trying to make it under the radar, and
Yeah,
it's frustrating, right? The division that's happening.
yeah. I mean, that's definitely there's definitely a lot of division right now. Seems like, within obviously the country as a whole, and then the division you kind of see now in the GOP with in the House with the whole Trump versus DeSantis thing. So it's a lot going on that's just seems so, I guess, yeah, divisive, right? It seems negative.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. The I mean, it's and the reason why it's negative is because you have certain folks, they think that the ends justifies the means. They can spin it in a way that to them they're trying to do what's best, right?
Hmm.
And but in reality, there's a lot of just jockeying for um to try to get what you want, and sometimes, and I would argue most of the time, it really does it without the expectation of the public really understanding the consequences of it, right? It's
Right.
I mean, when I was a kid, getting into debt was not a good thing, right? When I was young and trying to start my life, like debt was never positioned as a good thing. If you think about it, um, right now you have even from both sides of the aisle, right, from the Republicans or the Democrats, there's certain folks that think debt is a good thing.
Hmm.
And they've supported it. That's the debt fight that we're having right now with this sentiment of printing money, quantitative easing, they call it, right?
Hmm.
It's just
Yeah.
fancy words for just getting into debt on the backs of our children and our children's children. And it's ridiculous because it's assuming that we're gonna always have what we need to be able to pay that debt. And there's different factors in that without getting too complicated of what spurs an economy and what slows it down.
Hmm.
But right now we're it's almost like there's just this intentional um, debt mindset, and somehow they think that we're always going to get bailed out. I mean, if you
Yeah.
listen to history, Rome fell, Greece fell, they all fell because they all thought it would never happen to them.
Yeah, and that's again, if you look at history, history has a way of, in a sense, repeating itself.
Mm.
And if we're gonna go down that path, then we can't, as Americans, as people, we can't act like everything's always gonna be 100% good and think it's impossible. Anything could happen through history. Like you said, nations that no one probably thought were gonna fall fell, and you know, we just gotta. I think that's how we need people such as yourself, right? In government, right? Because I think a lot of the people in there too also don't have the best interest of the people. It's just, whatever the party is. Like I th- before we came on, I saw a clip and I forgot to save it, but it was I think it was a congressman, a Democrat, and he was on, I want to say, MSNBC, and he was saying that he doesn't even know why we have a ceiling for the debt. I think he was trying to compare it to Denmark because I guess they have no ceiling. But if you start to think, well, it's like the size of Denmark versus the size of the U.S., it's not comparable. Maybe that's why it's easier for them to not have a ceiling versus us, right? But I think, like you're saying, and like what you were explaining in your video, is there has to be a limit. We can't just keep spending and spending because you know, as all things we've talked about, it doesn't just affect us now, but it's going to affect the future. So I guess in plain terms, can you explain the from what you know about this agreement, or what's good or what's bad with it? from your understanding?
Yeah. So basically, it's a fiscal responsibility act. They're calling it. That needs to make you already question it, because as I've learned,
We were talking
usually,
about that last time. How they
yeah,
named the
the
bill.
way that they frame it is actually is the opposite usually. So fiscal responsibility, right? So if I'll try to basically take it back a couple steps from prior to this whole debt, ceiling date of June 5th, right when we would basically be running out of money. I mean, it's
Mhm,
it's pretty simple in terms if there's a certain amount of money that our country makes, right? And the simple reality is it's the private sector that creates that generates that economic growth. The government just manages extent with the tax base and all that. Um, and so the point is and there's obviously debt that you accrue for certain things that I mean, back in the day, like World War I and World War II, debt was something that happened as a necessity. Like, hey, I need to get into debt because we need to get basically defend our national sovereignty, protect our country, and all the
mhm.
craziness that was happening with those two wars. This is not the case anymore. So anyway, so the simple reality is the government has for last 40 years since even prior to Ronald Reagan had a debt amount, right? And
Mhm.
technically hasn't paid it off. And they even haven't had a balanced budget amendment, which would require them to balance the budget. It's a whole separate topic. But basically, from the Democrat sentiment, it was like, okay, we have this debt, and we can't just cut back on our obligations. Like that's kind of like you, if you have a credit card or if you have a car payment,
Mhm.
not paying your obligations is kind of, well, you can't basically not pay your car payment, right? You should be
Yeah,
paying
yeah.
your car payment. But that's an oversimplification,
Mhm.
because what they mean is, well, what we want to do is keep increasing the debt ceiling, right? So bottom line is they're saying, hey, I know that our credit card has a limit. Well, we want to tell the creditor, hey, increase that limit. And the dangerous part about this situation or the equation is we are the creditor
Mhm.
or the lender, and we're ultimately the ones that are
Paying it
spending
back.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're the ones that are creating the problem. Like it's the it's we're caught, our hands are in the cookie jar, right? We're
Mhm.
technically, this is supposed to be something responsible. So anyway, so the bottom line is they're wanting to increase the debt ceiling. All that means is they want to increase the debt limit. And I would, this is the most profound part of this reality is anything that's debt is basically off of what isn't already produced. Our GDP, they call it, our gross domestic product, basically what our country produces, that accrues revenue, right?
Mhm.
That the industries, the markets that are producing goods and services, and then that services obviously increases, it produces a level of revenue. Um, so that sentiment is basically saying, and that's like I said, so to the point is that the most dangerous part is they're actually saying is we want to put our ideas and the cost of those ideas on your children and on your children's children, because we know we don't have the money to pay for it now, but we have these grand ideas like with the Green New Deal, right? we
Mhm.
want we want to pay for, and it's twofold, because they not only do they think that they have good ideas, but they think they're the smart ones in the room that create the innovation, the ingenuity, right? If you're dealing with technology or medicine, that somehow they're the ones that are creating the solution at the same time that they're funding that solution. That's why they're so ideologically driven, right? Part of that, so to take it, like I said, a couple steps back, we had the Inflation Reduction Act. I think that's what we talked about at the last segment.
Yeah.
That did pass. That became law. That is where we hired 87, or we were basically had the funding, the $80 billion to hire 87,000 IRS agents, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so all that means is they pretty much had this idea of what they wanted to do, and they funded it. That passed. That's why you have, like I said, the 87,000 IRS agents. The money was sitting there. You also had these Green New Deal ideas, these subsidies for these big crony companies. So think about solar right now as an example is not technically profitable by itself. It's
Hmm.
just not, because it doesn't produce enough energy. It can't compete with nuclear, it can't compete with gas or even natural gas.
Right.
So anyway, so the point is they have to subsidize it, and that's the point of that Inflation Reduction Act. So fast forward to today, the fight is hey, we want to keep funding these crazy ideas, and we want your children to pay for it. We're not telling you that though. And then on the other side, the conservative side, they're saying no, we need to slow this down. How about we start paying some of this craziness off? How about we just get to first things first? And so that's where you ended up having with this new house. And Kevin McCarthy had a great opportunity. And he started off well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They passed the Limit Save Grow Act, HR 281. That actually was one that was focused on let's start limiting our spending, let's start saving money where we can, right? Reining in some of this COVID funds that's still sitting out there,
Hmm.
right? Like California gave some of these COVID funds to prisoners, right, in the state prison system. Um, and then the Grow Act obviously is to try to increase innovation, mainly energy, domestic energy production, right? Where they were going to try to restore the Keystone Pipeline as an example and increase our own production, which is going to decrease our costs because, supply and demand.
Right.
So they did that. They did a border security element because we have the issues at the border with a lot of this stuff with fentanyl and the craziness that's happening with the cartels. So they were starting off really well. So Kevin McCarthy started off strong. He had the support, and I was getting excited. But fast forward, you're getting closer and closer to this debt deal. And sure enough, basically, and it was sad because to me, to do it on the backs of what happened, ultimately a Memorial Weekend when we're supposed to be honoring our fallen, the
Hmm.
people that have passed, that have fought in wars for us, right, to preserve our nation. That it happened in the weekend where they did this, and guess what? It was nothing but a Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy deal because
Yeah.
even the House Freedom Caucus, and a lot of basically the Democrat leadership or the Republican leadership, um, only they knew about this deal, right?
Mhm.
They're the ones that cut the deal, and so now all of a sudden, as we're starting to read the bill, and I started reading it myself, there's just all of these just funny things that they're doing. So $32 trillion is our current debt. They just added $4 trillion. So I'll get to the point. Added $4 trillion to the debt. Um, the they basically cut this deal where they were going to do a 2-year freeze on post-COVID spending. So all that means is right now the current amount of spending that we have post-COVID,
Mhm.
uh, we're keeping it the same, right? So think about it. Like so COVID increased our debt because people were panicking, so they were paying these unemployment benefits, and they gave money to the
Mhm.
hospitals and all this
All the
stuff to
stimuluses and all that as well.
all the stimulus to deal with
Mhm.
COVID. So that increased the national debt. So instead of and what their initial Limit Save Grow Act, it was supposed to reduce by like $5 trillion. This agreement actually says no, let's keep the debt at the COVID levels, and if anything, if we do any reductions, all it does is it limits. So they call it limiting the rate of growth. So that's a
Okay.
complicated way. That's a gaslighting way of telling you is, hey, the inflation and the cost of everything is going up. We're just going to slow it down a little bit.
Slow it
We're not
down.
trying to
Mhm.
stop it. We're not trying to reverse course to neutralize it. We're just, that's like, hey, if you're dying, we're just going to have you die a little bit
Little by
slower,
little.
but you're still going to die pretty soon, right? It's
Gee.
crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so and then the other part of it too is they have uncapped debt. So all that means is they're not setting a debt limit anymore. They're actually uncapping it. They're
Mm.
they're they're opening it up for them to be able to abuse. And I couldn't believe it. So IRS is going to be fully expanded. All they did was cut the IRS by $1.4 trillion right now. Technically speaking,
I
all that means is the $80 billion that they had for the IRS. Now they're just going to get 78 billion. So hey, I you know,
So
you're,
because I saw that technically those 87,000 IRS agents are still going to be they're still going to be around.
yep, yep,
That
yeah.
didn't go away.
It's just a reduction in the amount that they're giving. $80 billion is sitting there, but now they're just going to cut it back by 1.4 billion. So it's peanuts, right? It's
Mhm.
not even a tenth of that percent of. And then the last insult to injury is this pay as you go plan. So they did this other bill, which Kat Kamek, and I follow her also, Congresswoman Kamek. She's part of the Republican leadership. She basically helped to co-sponsor. They call it the REINS Act, and the
Okay.
whole purpose of it is it's reining in the administrative state. So for those that don't know, the administrative agencies are the executive branch of the federal government, right? So if you get back to Constitution 101, there's
Hmm.
three articles in the Constitution, right? There's Article 1, which is the legislative branch. There's Article 2, which is the judicial branch, and then there's Article 3, which is the executive branch.
Hmm.
So the administrative agencies, right? If you think about CDC, the IRS, the DOJ, all these administrative agencies at the federal level, they all fall under the president. The president has authority over them.
Hmm.
That's why Donald Trump was was yeah, basically was cornered um
Mm.
by the DOJ. So to the point is this basically pay as you go allows them it basically allows them to find money to pay for the cost of that of administering the whatever basically duties they're going to administer as far as the administrative agency. So so it really doesn't reduce their or doesn't restrict them in the
Hmm.
reign. So to the point, the REINS Act was intentional from the House leadership, where they were actually going to say, okay, before you actually spend this money, you need to bring it back to Congress. We need to make sure that you have actual clear reasonings why you're going to move forward with spending this money for whatever you're saying is going to happen. I mean, everything is under the cloak of darkness, and everything is under the guise of a process, right?
Hmm.
Hey, we need money to do this process for, you know, climate change, or for taxpayer, you know, for all basically auditing the wealthy, you know, the greedy rich people, right? That are the
Right.
IRS going to go after. But it's their way of saying that we need this money for this, and the REINS Act was going to slow that down. Well, guess what? Now with this new bill, if they pass it, right, everything I think is in the debate stage right now.
Hmm.
Um, pay as you go allows them to ultimately bypass it. And I was even looking up the section in section 265, not to get too granular. Um, it actually says the director may waive the requirements of section 263 if the director concludes that the waiver is necessary for the delivery of essential services or is necessary for effective program delivery. Right?
Hmm.
When they could use very subjective, which all that means is very opinion based decisions,
Hmm.
then we're in trouble. Because all that means is we're going to come up with a loophole to get around Congress to spend this money to do whatever we want, ultimately to abuse the taxpayer. And that's what we're up against is we need a stronger Congress. We need a Congress
Yeah.
that's ready to
What?
fight.
Because I think obviously I was hearing if they didn't get to this agreement or something that the debt would default, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was the last that I seen was they have to agree to this or enact this by June 5th, I believe, 4th or 5th, something like
June
that.
5th.
Okay. So because I know there's I've seen a lot of Republican congressmen, I think mostly the Freedom Caucus is totally against it, right?
Yep.
Um, so two questions. So in the House, because I know in the Senate, there's some where they need 60 votes, not just a simple majority. In the House, is it just simple majority on everything that they pass there? I'm kind of going blank off the top of
I
my head
believe
now.
so, because I kept hearing it's the 218. 218 is, you know, so they needed 100, and like right now I was hearing that Kevin McCarthy needed 150 votes because he knew he was losing support from the Republican caucus. We have the
Mhm.
majority. He technically
Right.
can get votes to pass things, but that's assuming that he has Republican Congress folks that are willing to support him on whatever he's trying to push forward.
Hmm.
Right now, I'm hearing 150. That's scary because that to me means is he doesn't care if he gets Republican support. He doesn't
Right.
care if he gets conservative support because he's going to get the and from what I'm hearing, he's lobbying Hakeem Jeffries, who's the leadership of the Democrat caucus, to get those votes to pass this. If he
Mm.
gets this, I think it's going to be a permanent stain on Kevin McCarthy if he passes this without majority Republican support. It's going to make him look weak as a leader.
Would he get removed? Because I believe one of the things that when the 19 were holding out for speakership, one of the things they wanted was if there's basically like something that triggers a replacement. Do you think they'd go to that level if this thing passed?
Well, as I paid attention to it, all it takes is one congressperson
Yeah,
to make a motion to vacate,
there you go. That's what it was.
and they that pushes everybody in that conference, in the Republican conference, basically to say, "Shoot, I got to show up and vote my conscience now. Make it very public." Right. This is
Mm.
where I think this is
Puts
where
everybody on the spot.
it puts people on the spot. Like we got to remember this, right? The sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the truth is sunlight. It
Yeah.
100% is. That's where if we haven't engaged basically the voter base, the Latino community starts to understand these things. They start making calls to these Congress people. They say, "Hey, I'm paying attention, and I know better. I know what's going on." Then yeah, that is going to be public. People are going to see it, and if Kevin McCarthy does it without Republican majority support, he's not going to look very strong. It's going to hurt him.
Mhm.
And bottom line is yeah, the motion to vacate done by one congressperson is going to create such an uproar. And I know, I really believe that they're for the Freedom Caucus for sure.
Mhm.
They're put in a position where they have to make a decision to honor their word because they know that their word means more
Right.
um, than even their position. I would argue because they're only as strong as they follow through with what they say. The moment
Right.
that they don't follow through. So bottom line is, I don't see Matt Gaetz not following through. I don't see Anna Paulina Luna not following through. I see
Mhm.
certain Congress people definitely saying, Kevin, we like you. We didn't want to do this, but we have to remove you, or at
Mhm.
least push to remove you. And
Yeah.
just even the threat of removal is a huge deal.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and then that's kind of, it gets to the point where what's that saying where the rubber meets the road,
Yeah,
where
that's
it's like, the all that holding out they did during the initial voting for Speaker of the House. It's like if you don't hold them accountable to everything that, in a sense you guys demanded in order to make him the speaker,
yeah,
then like you said, then your word means
nothing.
nothing, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, it's as a Christian man, I live by. Yeah, I've learned a lot, and it's funny because if you think we're talking debt, we're talking technically the full faith and credit of the American people, which
mhm,
is where these Congress people are making the decisions. Credit means something. My point is um your word your word means something.
yeah,
There's a credit attached to you as a person when you do the right thing and people trust you. That trust, I mean
mhm.
that's what it says on our dollar bills, right? And it says in
In God
God
we
we
trust.
trust,
Hmm.
and it solidifies that this paper is an exchange of trust. It's an exchange of that confidence in each other. So my point is there's a scripture in the Bible that says, let your yea be yea and let your nay be nay. That means follow through with what you say. And
Hmm.
and I think if you really want to correct the ship, the Freedom Caucus has to follow through with what they said, and otherwise they're just going to be paper tigers. They call them, right?
Hmm.
They have no
Yeah,
real value.
yeah,
Um, so I see this being that it's going to push for that fight to get very real really quick.
yeah. And then so another thing, because obviously with politics, media, and all that, there's always a bunch of gaslighting, right? So you kind
Mhm.
of, or just straight up lies.
Yeah,
um So, when you hear that, oh, the country's going to default, you hear that obviously that's the worst thing that can happen, that we're going to get into a recession. Basically everybody's going to lose. It's going to be the worst thing ever. So, from your perspective, how could I put this question? Would it be better to continue to fight this bill that they agreed to, or to default? Because again, when they say default, they're trying to scare people. So
Yeah.
sometimes, like when I hear that in the news, I don't believe them, 100%. So from your opinion, what's the what's the route that should be taken? Is a default that bad? Would it be something that can they default but still solve it after? For example, if they hit that June 5th deadline or whatever it was that they had said.
So I guess the way to try to keep it simple is if you ever default on your debt, right,
Hmm.
on your mortgage, on your credit card, it's a pretty dire circumstance, right?
Hmm.
You're in a bad position. But my experience and well, two things. One is to put it in context, maybe take a step back, is there's a level of basically an expectation of revenue based off of the current situation with the market, where the GDP and ultimately the production of the where the economy, um, the revenue is coming from.
Hmm.
So my point is right now, and from what I'm learning is the economy is strong enough to cover basic things for sure.
Hmm.
So so if you're saying, so we have enough based off of our current economic trends to be able to cover uh, pretty much everything.
Hmm.
But you would have to have certain cuts. It would be a necessary element.
Hmm.
So it's like bankruptcy. Bankruptcy itself, it's reorganization. I mean, that's the essence of bankruptcy. You're reorganizing that debt,
Hmm.
right? You're renegotiating that debt. And I'm not trying to presuppose basically that we should be in bankruptcy. That's a good thing. I'm not saying that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there's got to be a sense of a correction, something that restores sanity in our fiscal house.
Hmm.
Right now, I mean, it's harder to make an argument that what we're doing not only is not that it's working, because it's not, but it's hard to argue that if we don't have some kind of a big shift in our mindset, the way that we're spending money, and or yeah, just increasing the debt ceiling and ultimately putting more debt on our backs and our children's backs,
Hmm.
it's hard to argue that things are going to get better. It's
Right.
only going to get worse.
Hmm.
So I don't want to I don't want us to basically default, but I think there would be very good things that would happen from that default. Like I said, if you think about reorganization, or if you think about correction,
Hmm.
what's going to happen? It's going to force Congress to say, what do we need to take care of first? And then see, so what they're arguing is, hey, grandma's not going to be able to get her medical care, or the people that are retired aren't going to get their social security.
Hmm.
That's not true. That is not true. The only reason why they're saying that, and yes, they could technically, you could make a decision today to cut that off. I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not arguing for that, but it's a threat. They're
Right.
doing it to put fear in people. We can pay all the things that are necessary, those things that I just mentioned, Social Security, we can pay Medicare, we can take care of these costs, but we would have to get rid of the woke garbage, right? There's certain things that would have to be cut, maybe some part of the spending as it relates to certain things that aren't necessary, right? There's a lot of things that we can do as a government. We can get rid of the Department of Education at the federal level, as an example.
Right.
A lot of people would easily argue, yeah, we don't really need a Department of Education at the federal level. There's already a state Department of Education in every state. It's
Yeah.
redundancy,
Yep.
right? Um, and I would also argue is you would
And
be in a better position if this market correction happened because the default, and it would force them to rethink their debt, the
Hmm.
government, it would actually create a good outcome that now what we can't handle because we don't have the money to handle it, we're going to hand that power back to the states and hand that power back to the locals. I
Right.
think that's a good right now. I mean, I'll bring it back to a local level as a county supervisor.
Hmm.
I remember telling my CAO, which is my administrator, he's kind of like the Joe Biden, and I hate to compare him. I'm not comparing him. He's the executive. He's the executive of my county, right?
Right.
I'm the legislative branch. My CAO is the executive, just to try to clarify. But
Yeah.
basically, um, I still remember having that conversation with my CEO where I told Ray, I was like, he had just called me and said, "Hey, Peter, there's this new thing. It's kind of crazy. Um, crazy in the sense that they're putting it on us, which because it's a really big lift. It's called care courts, and it's this idea to try to deal with the homeless population, providing them mental health services, social services, which isn't necessarily a bad idea,
Hmm.
you know, but obviously it's got to be something that's funded with all
Yeah.
the
Somebody's got
systems.
to pay for it.
It's got to be, yeah. Well, guess what? At the moment, the state government, Gavin Newsom was like, "Hey, we're gonna do this big thing. I want you guys to be excited. Oh, by the way, there's no money coming. You figure it out." Like we already have a ton of stuff on our plate. Now
Right.
you're adding this to our plate. So I remember telling my CAO, I told I said, look, I said, Ray, I swear, if these guys just took a hiatus, just stopped showing up to the Capitol in Sacramento, just stop showing up for 6 months. I swear life would get better because they would stop writing bills and there would be
Hmm.
less government involved in our lives, and then we would pick up the pieces, right? Because we would jump
Right.
in where we really need to. So
Hmm.
anyway, so that was kind of a very long explanation to say is if this debt situation happened where we had a default, one is I think it actually would strengthen our country. I'm
Hmm.
not, I don't, it would definitely have a lot of consequences. Certain government jobs would go away, but as long as Congress is focused, they can prioritize that time to make sure that the necessary services like Social Security, Medicare, that those things are taken care of. And I would actually think it would start to restore our fiscal house. And I think there would be a time when our life would get a lot better.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's true. When you hear about it, that's they use that threat, right, about Social Security going away, Medicaid, and then it just has, especially people scared because they feel like they're going to lose their, if that's their only form of income, that
Yeah,
that they have that fear, and then it's kind of used as a, it's a like a political thing now. So now
yeah,
you're using those people's fear as a way to gain more votes and be like, see, look what these guys did.
yeah,
But also, I think the example you gave, as far as like, if we were to default and we were to cut some spending on things we don't need, like the Department of Education, it's like, yeah, that's true. That's a, to me, it makes a lot of sense because, like you said, each state already has their own, and then each county basically has their own school board. So if we're spending, I don't know how much money we're spending on the Department of Education nationally, but if we have all that locally, yeah, that's one thing where I would say, yeah, we need to stop spending there, right?
yeah,
Also, the we do have a lot of useless spending, where we're sending money to other countries and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah,
So, it's like you said, they have to come to an agreement, but be responsible about it, not
yeah.
just because I feel like this deal is just like a band-aid that gets put on. And then obviously again in 2 years or whenever it comes up again, I think it's a 2-year deal. In 2 years, it'll come up again, and they're arguing about the same things.
That's it. They're kicking the can down the road. Nothing is changing. I would argue if there was a default, it would force. I mean, think about it. Did you know that the seven most wealthiest counties in the country are around Washington D.C.?
Oh well.
Why is that? That's because the lobbyists, these corporations that
Stay
are
close.
basically in the back pocket of these folks, the wealthiest people in our country, they're basically corralling around where the money is, right? Where is
Hmm.
the spigot that feeds them? It's right there in Washington, D.C.
Hmm.
So think about that. And that wasteful spending nothing's going to stop it if we stay the same course.
Right.
Nothing's going to stop it, right? I mean, technically speaking, the House of Representatives, the Republican majority, argued for one not going into a default, right? So they were trying to say, look, let's not default because there will be consequences, and there'll be some
Mhm.
pain. So let's not get into a default, but let's do it. Let's slow things down where we cut a lot of the wasteful spending. And they actually said we're going to increase the debt limit, but we're only going to increase it um, by $1.4 trillion or something like that. And it was over like 10 years. But along that way, there would be certain things slowly unraveled and cut back, which
Mhm.
is it's smart, right? It's like,
Right.
hey, right now I need a certain amount of money to live, but I'm reorganizing things. I'm gonna help the economy, so I'm gonna get a better job. I'm gonna make a little bit more income, and
Mhm.
and as time goes on, I'm gonna agree that as I make more money, I'm gonna pay down this debt. I'm gonna cut my wasteful spending. Instead of eating out 3 days a week, I'm gonna eat out once a month, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah.
what we do when we live a responsible life, you start to
Right.
change your habits. That's what the House of Representatives basically pitched, but they didn't get the support for it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
The Inflation Reduction Act was proof that the Democrats don't care about your pain because their current habits is only increasing your costs, right?
Right.
Think about it. They just agreed with the $4 billion debt increase or $4 trillion debt increase, while your gas is almost $7 a gallon. Like that's gonna make that $7 a gallon go up to $8 a gallon. Like it's gonna make
Mhm.
your life more expensive because you have to not only pay for the debt, but you got to pay for the service of that debt, the interest rate.
Mhm.
That means, I mean, I have heartburn when I'm paying $30 in interest or $40 in interest for a
Yeah.
credit card, right?
Yeah.
They're agreeing with paying, $500 like a car payment's worth in interest.
Mhm.
It's just ridiculous. And think about the other reality that now you're having that mindset putting us in a position where we're weaker. So what's happening to the dollar? It's getting weaker.
Mhm.
And if it's getting weaker, we're no longer the world reserve currency. So guess what? Now the countries that hate us will have less of a reason to respect us. And
Mm.
then you'll have those nations realizing, hey, we can't depend on the dollar anymore. So you'll have other countries lining up with our enemies. It's a bad deal all the way around.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
irresponsibility has to stop.
Yeah. And I think some of our, people that don't like us already started doing that, right? Is it bricks? Am I remembering that right? Uh,
Um,
something
well,
like that.
there's China that's trying to come up with their own world reserve currency. They're lining up with Russia, the more and I'm not saying that I like them. It's just there's a wise way to handle relationships. I mean, Ronald Reagan dealt with Russia, but
Mhm.
he had a really good relationship with forgot his name. He has the stain on his forehead, right? The big birthmark. Um,
Mhm.
but he had a good relationship with Russia, but he didn't mess around. He said, look, if you're going to be doing this arms thing, we're going to also defend ourselves. So all of a sudden we're going to ramp up our defense, right? At peace through strength. I don't know if you remember that.
Mhm.
So anyways, my without diverting into that conversation, just the reality is you have to have if I think we should simplify it. If America is a benevolent nation. That means it's a very loving and giving nation, right?
Mhm.
Where we help other countries, right? I mean, America was the first country that had a war with a nation and then ended up rebuilding them back up after the war. That was Japan right after World War
Mhm.
II. So anyway, so if America's is the essence of freedom, then if we're not if we lose our standing as the nation that everybody respects and that ultimately that knows how to handle good relationships with other nations where we're not
Mhm.
a tyrant nation where we try to take over other nations, um,
Mhm.
then by default we're going to get then that sentiment shrinks, that freedom, that sense of freedom and liberty, then there's a replacement for that, right? There's a vacuum. There's a they call it basically there's a statement that says nature abhors a vacuum. That means that there's an emptiness because of not a good honest presence in the room. you're going to have bad people take that place, and all of a
Right.
sudden they're going to be the dominant forces. I mean, look at what's happening at the border, where we don't have a
Mhm.
strong presence. All of a sudden now the cartels are taking over.
Mhm.
So you can't you if we're the good nation, then if we lose our standing, then guess what? The rest of the world falls apart just the same.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think that's one of the things that I really liked about Trump, to be honest, was how he would deal with North Korea and Russia and China. And it was, in a sense that he wasn't threatening them, but he did, in a sense, tell them, like you said, uh, what is it? Was it strength through
Peace through strength.
peace through strength, right? Because he wasn't backing down. He had his position, and hey, he kept the peace.
Yeah.
We can't. Trump was the. I remember when he was running, and that they didn't want him to win. They were saying Trump's going to be the guy that starts World War III. So
I
more
remember that.
more gaslighting and all that. And then right now we have Biden in there, and he's the one that's inching us
He's,
closer and closer to it, and no, not a peep, right, from the media.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's super important because, yeah, like you said, if America falls, in a sense, then somebody else is going to take over, and like you said, there's that power vacuum, right? And it's
Right.
usually not good people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Ronald Reagan said that America never got into a war because it was too strong. America never they we were the ones that basically knew how to keep the peace because of our strength. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was a meekness and humility about our nation, and so that made us not just loved and respected, but we were loved and respected not out of fear. It's because we showed something that other nations didn't have. And but the hardest part that we're not realizing is our weakness now is, yeah, it's handing off now this sense of empowerment to, you're basically sending a signal to your enemies,
Mm-hmm.
and it's having them now figuring out, or at least believing, that there might be a chance that they could defeat us.
Mm-hmm.
It's dangerous all the way around, right?
Yeah.
There's a scripture in the Bible that also says, uh, in order to enter a house, you need to tie down the strong man. So it's pretty profound, because
Mm-hmm.
the strong man, basically, the only way you're going to be able to take over his house is if you tie him up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening to our nation, is we're being tied down by debt, we're being tied down by a weak president, we're being tied down with just these burdensome regulations and this abuse, this lying and gaslighting, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
We're, now all of a sudden, we're in a position of weakness, and unless we course correct, I think that debt ceiling, that's part of my thinking, was that course correction might have actually created a healthy outcome. We would have taken our lumps, but I think in a lot of ways things would have changed with the attitude of America in a better way. We would be
Yeah.
more unified.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I think now, as we were saying earlier, I think it's close to getting to that vote. I think I had seen that they're going to vote for it today. Uh, if it all, again, if you want to call it, if it all goes well, um,
Yeah,
I believe they'll vote today, and then it'll end up in the Senate. I believe in the Senate they would have to have 60 votes, if I'm not mistaken. There, so you know that'll be another kind of eye opener too, because if it gets handed off to the Senate, then you get to see, who's really about what they were saying and who's not.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I think they're a 50-50, right? Pretty much. So
yeah,
they need, I believe, at least 8 or 9 Republicans to vote for it.
yeah.
So we'll see how that goes.
It'll well, I mean, I guess this pressure cooker that's happening with the debate is actually positioning things where uh, the transparency element that you wanted is starting to happen unintentionally, right?
Right.
Because, like you said, the people um, that vote, that you'll know where they stand, and
Right.
this is being messaged I mean, all the people that I've been talking to, and the people that I've been paying attention, them, the messaging and the national media personalities. Um, you have the strong conservative sentiment saying, we need to fight this debt deal because it will really the civil war that's happening amongst the Republican sentiment.
Hmm.
uh, it's really bringing to the surface where the weakness is in our Republican caucus, and
Right.
so I think it's going to push us in a more partisan way. Um, the Republican caucus, I think, is going to have to become more partisan because there's not this honesty happening. So the very
Mm.
thing that they don't want, the very thing that the moderates don't want, is actually what they're creating by caving.
Right.
They're creating this problem. It's
Right.
kind of like it's funny how the whole thing with the Trump phenomenon. A lot of people, they get so upset about it. They don't realize that when you attack President Trump, all you do is make him stronger, because
Yeah.
all of a sudden it becomes more apparent where people are attacking him, having nothing to do with what he did wrong, having more to do with their personal interest, right? I mean, how many
Right.
people when how many people that attack him, um, have a personal interest in why they should attack him, right?
Right.
And it has less to do about what's best for the nation. It has more to do about self-interest, and
Right.
that's the sad part.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It is. It is. I think. You know. For people that have been paying attention, it's obvious that a lot of these politicians are putting their party over the people,
Yeah,
and more and more it's visible. Danny has a saying where he says, with time the truth comes out. So it's kind of
amen.
what you were saying earlier. It's with this time that's passed by, and we get to certain points where it's like, all right, the truth is going to come out. If you were really about what you were saying, or if you're just talking to talk.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I think that's pretty profound because I mean, when it comes down to the people, the biggest thing is there's so, from my understanding, from what I've seen, there's so little confidence in the people. Like I could go out
Hmm.
and talk to my voters and have full on conversations with them, and a lot of them don't understand the process. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of wisdom in the public. Like they're really, and what I'm seeing with being in the circles of people that have been in office or are in office, and I'm generalizing, right? Because there is good folks in between, but it's less. It's the minority. It's not the majority, and it's sad. But anyways, my point is there's less of a confidence in the public.
Hmm.
There's more of a confidence in themselves, and that's the most foolish sentiment I have ever seen.
Yeah.
Because you play like you're God, where you can dominate the room and think that you can direct the ship just because you have a position of influence.
Yeah.
I think
I
you
know. I
actually,
know better.
yeah, there's another scripture in the Bible that says that pride comes before the fall. So that
Mhm.
sentiment is foolish because even if the people don't understand, they live in a world where policy exists and has ultimately it they feel that consequence of your decisions or your lack of decisions, right? So
Mhm.
they will tell you the reality, right? We got to be, as policymakers, better listeners to understand where they're at so that we know what the problem is. Kind of like a doctor, be a good listener and pay attention to what their symptoms are. And once we start to understand it and see the consistency throughout the communities, then we start to say, okay, we know what the problem is. Now we can come up with a policy, and we're not the ones that really solve the problem, but at least we come up with a policy that helps facilitate or make it easier for the public to solve their own problems, right? And that's the
Right.
ultimate sign of success, is when you empower the people to do what's best for them, right? I don't want to
Mhm.
I'd rather, instead of me giving you money, I'd rather give you an opportunity. I'd rather give you a pathway for you to understand how to become a successful business owner, or a doctor, or an engineer, whatever your goals are.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I'm a I'm gonna throw you a curveball, or it's not so much a question, but I'm gonna make a statement and just kind of what you think. Um, so here in California, th- as far as running for Congress, right? It has crossed my mind. But like, should I do it one day? And I don't know, maybe little by little. I'll get to that point, right? But this is I guess a feeling that I get, and I don't know you running for Congress how you feel, so it might be like a little curveball or not. But I feel like in California, in order to get that big support, let's say from the GOP, because I guess that's this when you go to both sides, that's where we, for the most part, align, right? Closer to GOP.
Yeah, Republican.
I feel like in order to get in good with them, you have to be on good terms with McCarthy.
Mm,
And I feel like if you're not on good terms with McCarthy or if you criticize him a lot, that the GOP won't, in California, I'm not, in California in general, won't give you that support you need. So I don't know if that's just me kind of from the outside looking in. That's what I would feel like. I feel like if I would run, I would have to, in a sense, be on McCarthy's good side to get a good amount of support. Otherwise, I'm on my own. What do you think of that? It's kind of off.
yeah.
It's a different topic, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, as far as the support, I mean, really. So there's two things that you said. One is who kind of controls the cards of the support system, right? Which is
Mhm.
technically the party system, right? The two parties, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party.
Right.
Um, yeah, there definitely is a going sentiment that Kevin McCarthy holds the cards in California, and yes, he has a lot of power and influence in California, 100%.
Mhm.
I do believe that, yeah, he directs the ship of the state party.
Right.
Um, so, but technically speaking, as far as the goals, which is basically trying to win a congressional race, um, that all depends really on, so there's certain factors like raising money, right? Because
Mhm.
to keep it simple, my two goals when I run is one is I need to get in front of every voter, and two is I need to raise money to get in front of every voter, and that's it. Like, I don't want to have to ask you for money, but I'm going to ask it because I need to buy a mailer. I need to get a TV ad. It's just I need to get the exposure, and it
Mhm.
costs. It's not going to be free for me to put my name out there, right?
Right.
But there's also other mechanisms to increase your exposure, right? You have a strong support system. You have
Right.
door knockers, phone bankers, people that are going to do the work for you to get you in front of voters, right?
Mhm.
You're still going to need to have material to give to that voter so that they could remember you, right? It'll
Right.
have a little bit about who you are. So anyways, without necessarily giving campaign advice, bottom line is if I firmly believe, and this is why I think the Latino community is the dominant force as far as the demographic, because just my under it's they're basically the majority population. 40% of the base in California is Latino.
Mhm.
We're hardworking folks, so
Mhm.
we'll make money where we can, right? We'll sell fruit on the street corner if we have to. So my point is we're very efficient, and
Mhm.
uh, and party politics could easily become very expensive because if you're part of the party system, you're probably going to be encouraged in a very strong way for you to make sure that you're using the support system that they created, right? Where it's their lobbyists, it's their support system, it's their technology folks. But I do believe that if you're going to run, if you work hard, you can get the support. You can, but you're not, so the endorsement is one thing where the state party says, hey, we
Mhm.
put Danny's name on, as our endorsee for whatever race, but that's just that's just the visual, right? Because they'll put you
Right.
on their website, so there is a benefit to it. But in general, the bigger thing is how hard are you ready to work? Because apart from the endorsement, if you do the work to get in front of the voters, to talk to them, to know the issues, to make sure that your presence is felt, to make sure that you're convincing people that once you get elected, you are going to represent them, then it's a game changer. Then at
Mhm.
that point, it's like you become less dependent. Um, and I'm not I'm a Republican. I'm proud Republican, but I'm not
Mhm.
a Republican necessarily because of the party. I'm a Republican
Right.
because of the value system, right?
Mhm.
Limited government, right? We believe in the family unit, right?
Right.
Traditional marriage, so. there's things about it, the Latino community that we're proud of, and we're not going to run from. Why should we? Why should we
Hmm.
um, not stand for what we know has always been good for generations? So anyway, so I think we're at the cusp of a lot of good things, but I think to win, if that's the question, to win, you work hard, you can win. But
Hmm.
it's I never thought 6 years after being a business owner that that I'd barely be starting to figure things out. My point is when I say work hard, that means we have to be in it for the long haul.
Hmm.
Too many people run and they run with a short term perspective, and then they end up quitting right away. Like, it takes time for people to get to know you. It takes time for you to get to know the issues. It takes time for you to get to know the policies or the constitutional authority that you have, and there's the rules and procedures depending on the jurisdiction, the jurisdiction of the entity, right? Whether it's a
Right.
city government or a county government or a school board. So it takes time to get good at all that, to understand that. But if your heart's in the right place and you want to do it for the right reasons, you can do very well. I have a lot of faith in a Danny over some rich person that just retired and all of a sudden wants to run for office so they can have a nice pension,
Mm.
and still get some kind of medical benefits. I
Yeah.
have more confidence in someone like you than someone that's just, and I'm not anti-rich people at all. All I'm saying is it just depends on the heart of the person. Some people do it
Mhm.
for the right reasons, some people not so much.
Right. Right. No, that's true. The people have their reasons, right? And not all of them are for the people, but self beneficial.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's like I said, that's one of the things. It's crossed my mind for sure. Um, and I think that's something that we should definitely have in Congress is term limits, or if it's not term limits, at least an age limit. Because we have a lot of these congressmen that are, in their 80s, senators, high 80s, and they're still in government and they're making these decisions that, like we said earlier, are going to affect people in the future. And to not I don't want to sound mean, but those people aren't going to be here that much longer and they're making these massive decisions. So I think that's why it makes sense to have like either term limits or an age limit. I
Yeah,
don't I wouldn't think it'd be wrong if let's say if you said at 65, or what is it, the retirement age, or 67, I forget what it is nowadays. Um at that age, you can't run for government anymore, for Congress or anything like that. Because I think you need the next generation too to start kind of picking up the slack, right? And
um,
stop depending on all these lifelong politicians. So I think that's one thing too that definitely needs to change in our government.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, definitely not without sounding discriminatory, because the age element, I understand. I mean, if you've never ran and you're 60 or 70, I mean, I don't know if that would be fair, right? Because
Mhm.
if they never, but to your point um, it's more folks that are doing it because it's a lifetime, um,
Right, right,
which I think I 100% agree. There should be term limits. It should, if you start at late in age running for office, fine, but you're going to be set at a cap because you don't want to be part of the system, right? Which is what it
right,
seems to
right.
happen. Usually, they
Yeah,
become part of the very system that you disagree with.
right. And I think in my because I'm just trying to avoid what what we're dealing with now, what has happened. When you got people that have been in Congress for 40 years or whatnot. That's way too long in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, and there's definitely a disconnect. I mean, if you think about the whole purpose of representation, the idea of Article One, like basically the legislature being the closest to the people, is basically what the founders spoke about.
Hmm.
That's for obvious reasons, because if you're closer to the people, you know their issues and you
Right,
better represent them, right? It's the idea of your local guy who used to be a grocery worker, or maybe he owned a grocery store, but either way, he's part of that community, he or she, and understands the issues of that community. Used to, be a coach, or used to, volunteer time that person understands that community, understands the issues and the deficiencies, puts that person in a healthy position to say, okay, I know my community now. When I run for office, now
Hmm.
that I'm learning my office, I can make sure that as I understand my authority in that office, that I'm going to make sure that I'm going to take that authority to the benefit of the very district that elected me, right? So
Right.
it's getting back to a circular element of reciprocating that benefit back to the very people that elected you. Like that's the way it was
Hmm.
intended. But
Hmm.
now you have this very big separation, and it's even it's grown more. The more the federal government has grown, the more, I mean, and I don't know if you realize this, Danny, but the more the federal government has grown, the more they've taken the normal everyday issues of life
Hmm.
away from you, away from the local government, away from the state government, and they've taken it and they've started acquiring that power, right? Because every time they make a decision, they
Hmm.
can technically back it with money. That money represents power and influence. And ultimately, if you have a new department that you created, then you're also by default, you're those people are in a position of to a certain extent making sure that they're honoring the person that, or the the people that helped establish their position.
Hmm.
So it starts to create a, slowly but surely, it starts to create a big disconnect between the locals and the federal government. So the founders are really profound in the way that they established this constitution, this constitutional republic,
Right.
to make sure that that we didn't have that separation, and that there was independent, there was basically sovereignty at the local level where we had authority that the state couldn't take from us, and there was sovereignty at the state level where they had authority that the federal government couldn't take from them. And
Hmm.
it's, my final point is it's been said, which is true, that the states created the federal government. The federal government didn't create the states. When the 13 colonies were established,
Hmm.
uh, they were technically independent nations. If you think about it, they
Right.
were
Right.
colonies,
Hmm.
and they formed one union. They were called nation states.
Hmm.
So they had to agree as states that said we don't want to be independent of each other. We want to be unified. That's when they created the United States, right?
Hmm.
So it's pretty profound. So if anybody ever says that the federal government is supposed to be stronger than the states or the locals, they're 100% wrong. It's the opposite.
Yeah, I believe if I don't want to be wrong here, but I believe it's the 10th Amendment, right? That kind of says that as well, that the state and the people have the power.
100%. I was like gonna pull my constitution.
I
Um,
think it's the 10th one. I don't want to be wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
yeah, I'm pretty positive you're right. It's anything not granted to the federal government is reserved respectively to the states or to the local.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah, it designates that if it's not written in the Constitution as far as a specific authority that the federal government has, then it by default, then it hasn't been created yet. If there's a
Hmm.
new right that we think there exists, it does not belong to the federal government. That right by defaults to the states or to the locals.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Okay.
and it's this whole idea of yeah of federalism where there's local
Mhm.
representation, local authority. You know, technically, I mean, I exercised it during the lockdowns, right, with the public health officer,
Right.
where the public health officer is like, "Hey, I'm telling you what you need to do," and I'm like, "Look, I'm going to test the waters right now. If you think you have that right to tell me to do what you think you want me to do, how about you do it without me paying you? Because I hold the power of the purse. I am the
Right.
legislature. I hold the money in my hands, right? Metaphorically speaking, we have the budget, we have the funds, and we're gonna basically we're gonna test the waters. He didn't like when I did that. He quit 2 hours later. So it just proves the point that we do have authority. We just have
Yeah.
to use that authority.
Yeah. And then just kind of, I think people have to have a better understanding what when we vote for Congress people, for representative, that it's exactly that. They're supposed to represent us and what we want, right? And what we need. Um because when you think about it, there's I don't know, I mean, well, maybe obviously don't know everybody, but I don't know a lot of people that want to pay more taxes.
So,
You know what I mean? So
yep.
you would imagine if representation was really representing people, there'd be continuous, uh how could you put it, bills or things, conversations about reducing taxes as much as possible. So
right.
just even that example kind of shows you that that there is, like you're saying, that separation, that disconnect between the representative and the locals. So I
Right.
think people have to kind of pay more attention to that, what their congressman or woman is doing when they're in Washington. And because people, hey, Washington is far, you know what I mean, from California, and it's like you're not paying attention. If you're not paying attention, you're not going to know what your representative is doing to represent you.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and think about it. This is why I get so upset with the whole sentiment of reparations, or hey, the you know, where they dismiss the past. I mean, it was pretty clear to me that they had no respect for history when
Hmm.
people were tearing down these statues. And I don't care who you are. I don't care if you think they're racist or whatever. You're
Hmm.
erasing history. And if they're bad people, then we definitely need to remember them. I'm not saying we glorify them if they
Right.
did bad things, right? But if we had statues of folks like these Confederate statues or whatever, there's a story to tell. And it's not a simple story. A lot of the times they try to simplify things, and to me it's just, the biggest point is it insults you. It says you're
Right.
too dumb to understand, you're not going to do your homework, so I'm going to lie to you about this, right? Like, this whole idea of that slavery was just like, one, that it was this Republican thing. Actually, it was, the Republican Party was established to eliminate slavery.
Right.
Abraham Lincoln was very anti-slavery. He actually
Mhm.
said, we need to go to war, not because I want to, but because we know that this scourge of slavery, this disease in our country, we need to get rid of it. And our country is too divided right now. So the Civil War was basically something that he didn't want to happen, but he knew that slavery was such an important issue that they were willing to go to war for it. But
Mhm.
anyways, to my point is there was black slave owners just as much as there was white slave owners, right?
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
so I'm not justifying slavery. It was definitely wrong. But anyways, it's just they simplify and try to insult you, insult your intelligence, and try to create this broad brush, like, hey,
Mhm.
it's all, everything's the same. But so think about it. The Declaration of Independence, it had 38 grievances. Separate, one of the grievances was taxation without representation,
Mhm.
right? There was a quartering of soldiers. There's all these different things. My point is history teaches us a lot of things. When the
Mhm.
founders wrote, when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, he laid out the reasons why we needed to separate. That's why it was a Declaration of Independence. It was to separate from Great Britain, from the mother country. So
Mhm.
when he did that, he was laying out the issues, the policy issues, the rhino issues per se. He was saying, hey, these are the issues that we're dealing with this king who says that he wants that he cares about us, but he's in a distant nation and he's taxing us for things when we're not even getting that tax base back into our communities to take care of our needs. He's
Mhm.
just keeping it, and he's trying to control us, right? He's telling us how to live, like, so anyways, it was literally like this aha moment where they were like, you know what, we've tried everything to try to work out, we don't want to go to war with Great Britain, but the Revolutionary War happened because it was just, they had to fight tyranny, and it was the churches that got in line to first fight those wars.
Mhm.
So anyways, my point is history is pretty profound when we learn from it.
Yeah.
This nation was created, I firmly believe, by God, as a beacon, as an example to the rest of the world. And those that want to erase history, they just, all they want to do is create chaos and repeat the mistakes that we basically they want to make sure we never remember those mistakes, I guess, because they want us to repeat them again.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, that's one way to get things to repeat, right? Is to have everyone forget about them,
Yeah,
and then in their minds, it's happening for the first time when, in fact, it's happened before, and in a sense, we've learned from it. We're growing, you know, and we've moved on and we've gotten better,
that's
right?
right.
If we eliminate all that history, uh, then yeah, you're getting into an area where at some point people are going to forget about it,
Right.
and that history is going to be gone, and we're going to repeat it.
Repeat
And
this. Thanks.
hopefully we don't. And but I think you made a good point. A lot of things do get simplified, right? Even when it comes to that reparation stuff, when it comes to the border, voter ID, everything gets simplified in a manner to where it's like, this is, I'm telling you it's like this because like you said, right, it make you feel like, oh, am I dumb, like, do I not get it the right way or something. And I think that's where people like you come in and and explain things to people and show them the bigger picture, because I think in the media and with politicians, in especially those lifelong ones, and you can tell who's in there for their own their own benefit, and who's there for the benefit of the country.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. I mean,
they
I have so much confidence in the public. I really do. And I firmly believe, by God's grace ultimately, but the people are the ones that are going to restore the nation. And it's
Mhm.
going to be the average everyday person, the
Yeah.
father who cares to be a good father and a good husband, the business owner that cares about his product so much that he wants to make it better for his consumers, right? The
Mhm.
entrepreneur who wants to create a new innovation, that wants to cure a disease, or create a new innovation that's going to create some new opportunity for a market that hasn't been created before. Like, there's confidence, right? And that's Thomas Jefferson espoused that. Like, I learned, it was pretty profound. But and think about the opposite effect when you have an elite mindset, right? When you are in office for a long time, you think you're the smartest person in the room. You just been there a long time, and yeah, you can talk the lingo, you understand it. But I know Danny could understand it just as well. He
Mhm.
just needs to put time into it, right? And especially if you're passionate about it, I think passion is just as profound, or maybe even more profound, than talent, right? Because passion means you're going to be driven no matter what to keep going.
Mhm.
But yeah, but if you have that elite mindset, then guess what? They dominate the room. Their goal is to make you look dumb, and they can care
Mhm.
less if you're actually figuring it out. They would rather you not figure it out, because if you don't understand, then they can control you the more. I mean, that's what happened prior to the forming of this nation in the Reformation era, right? When you had, basically the universal church, and this is not me bashing it, but it is the truth, where they would chain the Bible to the pulpit, and they said, "Hey, we're gonna teach it to you in Latin. Oh, by the way, you guys only know the regular common man's language, the English language. We're gonna still do it in Latin. Just trust us. I'm gonna interpret it for you." And you need to basically pay these indulgences, and you need to basically pay for your sins. By the way, we need more money in order to pay for your sins. Like, you talk about
Mhm.
control, that's the abuses definitely that have happened. So I'm not saying that we've lived a perfect life as a country. Definitely the church hasn't been perfect. All that to be said is the elites are the ones that ultimately try to control the conversation, right? That's what's happening today with the media.
Mhm.
The folks that are passionate about the people are the ones that want to get them in the place where, look, I want you to be empowered and to have the same opportunities that I did, to run for office, to be in office, to represent people, to ultimately become passionate about loving this country and loving the people in it. And I think that's what it means to be an American.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree with that. But yeah, I mean, you know, we'll see how this all plays out, right? Especially with this debt ceiling thing. We'll see how it all plays out, and hopefully people do what's right for the people, and not just for the party, or not again just putting band-aids on things and kicking the can down the road. But if they do, in 2 years they're gonna have Peter Hernandez there. Yeah, fighting back, right? So
I'm in. I'm in. Yeah, we're gonna build the base. We're gonna get people excited. Yeah, we want, there needs to be a lot more people that are passionate, right? I want
mhm,
other people to be in a position to take back ground that these people have stolen from us.
yeah,
It's time. It's time for our nation to be free again.
yeah, and like you said, we're here. We're gonna use our voices. We're gonna speak up, and who knows, if we're needed, if we're needed in Congress one day, we might just be there. So God has a plan for everyone, and at the end of the day, you know, with God, we'll win.
Amen. Praise Jesus. Amen.
But yeah, so uh, you know, thank you for coming on, Peter. I appreciate it. Um, What was your website again?
HernandezForCongress.com is my website. Yeah, and if you want to reach out, Peter at HernandezForCongress.com is my email,
Okay.
or my campaign manager is Kristen at HernandezForCongress.com. Yeah, we're
Okay.
we're starting early. We're working hard. We're building the base. We're getting people excited.
Nice, nice. And whenever you want to come on during your campaign and all that, you're more than welcome. Uh, anytime, the door open door here.
Praise God.
So,
Awesome.
hopefully you can get in there one day and fight the good fight.
Amen.
All
Thanks for
right.
everything, Danny.
Thank
Take
you
care.
too.
God
All right.
bless.
All right, everybody. Have a good one.
Take care.